Logan Adams adjusted the cufflinks of his immaculate charcoal suit, a subtle display of wealth that only the discerning eye could appreciate. The evening air outside Maison Lumière, London's most exclusive French restaurant, was crisp and cool, carrying an air of sophistication that mirrored Logan himself. The chauffeur opened the sleek black car door, and Logan stepped out with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to perfection. Every movement, every detail, from the shine of his polished shoes to the precision of his tailored attire, spoke of a life meticulously constructed. His companion, Amelia Carter, followed moments later. She emerged like a vision, her emerald gown flowing effortlessly with each step. Her blonde hair cascaded in soft waves, gleaming under the streetlights as if touched by gold. Amelia smiled warmly as she slipped her arm through Logan's, her silver stilettos clicking delicately against the pavement. "This place is stunning," she murmured, her voice soft, polished, rehearsed. Everything about her was the image of poised elegance. Logan responded with a polite nod, his expression reserved but calculated. This was his world. A world of pristine appearances, silent power, and carefully chosen companions. The restaurant, famed for hosting London's elite, was his stage. A place where success wasn't spoken but shown, where every glance and gesture conveyed unspoken hierarchies. The ambience enveloped them like a velvet cloak as they entered the grand doors. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in soft golden light, reflecting off meticulously set tables adorned with white linens and gleaming china. The scent of freshly baked bread and delicate truffle-infused dishes wafted through the air, promising opulence. The maitre d', recognizing Logan immediately, offered a respectful nod and guided them to a central table. Logan followed without hesitation, his movements deliberate, his posture exuding confidence. Amelia remained close, her fingers lightly grazing his sleeve, an unspoken signal of partnership, though Logan viewed her more as a well-chosen accessory than a confidant. The evening had begun exactly as Logan intended, controlled, immaculate, and ideally on script. Yet beneath the polished surface, Logan was unaware that his carefully curated world was about to fracture tonight, exposing cracks he thought were long buried. Logan Adams settled into his seat with the practiced ease of a man who belonged. The hum of low conversation and the gentle clink of glassware created a symphony of luxury that soothed him. Across the table, Amelia Carter began speaking, her voice animated as she recounted her recent shopping excursion on Bond Street. She painted a vivid picture of designer boutiques, champagne lounges, and the latest collection of a Parisian couture house she deemed exquisite. Logan offered the occasional nod or murmur of agreement, but his attention wandered. His gaze drifted across the restaurant, taking in the opulent surroundings. Couples leaned close over candlelit tables, murmuring secrets in hushed tones. Business moguls discussed million-dollar deals with handshakes as smooth as the wine they sipped. It was a setting Logan knew well, one that celebrated success, precision, and power. But tonight, something felt different. His eyes paused on the waitstaff moving deftly through the room, trays balanced with an almost theatrical grace. Then he saw her. It was a fleeting glimpse at first, a woman passing between tables, her head turned away. But something about her movement tugged at a memory buried deep in Logan's mind. He shook it off, dismissing the thought as a coincidence. This was Maison Lumière, where familiarity was rare, and faces were quickly forgotten. But moments later, she appeared again. She emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of delicate hors d'oeuvres, her movements poised and precise. Logan's breath caught. This time, he saw her clearly. The sharp but gentle lines of her face, the dark brown eyes that once looked at him with love, the graceful tilt of her head. It was Sarah Blake, his ex-wife. For a brief moment, Logan froze, his carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. The world around him blurred. The soft candlelight and the murmured conversations faded into nothingness as his focus narrowed solely on her. Sarah, here? Working as a waitress? The question struck him like a hammer. Amelia's voice pierced his fog. Logan, are you even listening to me? Her tone carried the faintest hint of irritation. Logan blinked, forcing a tight smile. Of course. You were talking about Bond Street, Amelia gave a satisfied nod and launched back into her story, utterly oblivious to the shift in his demeanor. But Logan couldn't look away. He watched Sarah creep through the room, her black apron tied neatly over her uniform. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, his gaze dropped to her midsection. Beneath the apron, the unmistakable curve of pregnancy was visible. Sarah was very pregnant. A sharp jolt shot through Logan's chest, though his face betrayed nothing. Years of negotiations and boardroom battles had trained him to hide his emotions behind an impenetrable mask. But inside, his mind raced. Was it possible? Could the child be his? Memories flooded him, moments from their marriage that he had long buried. Quiet evenings at home when she had hesitantly spoken about starting a family. Nights when he dismissed her dreams as distractions. The day she left him, signing the divorce papers with a grace that stung more than any argument could. Logan clenched his jaw. He had convinced himself that the chapter of his life was closed, that Sarah was a part of his past. And yet here she was, pregnant and working in a restaurant he frequented. The sheer contrast between the woman she was now and the woman she had once been shook him in ways he couldn't articulate. Sarah seemed to sense his gaze. She turned slightly, her eyes locking with his briefly, electrifyingly. Her step faltered, the tray trembling in her hands before she steadied herself and looked away. She quickly returned to her work, her head held high, as though determined to pretend he didn't exist. Logan remained frozen in his seat, his heart pounding as if he'd just run a marathon. Across the table, Amelia chatted on, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside him. For the rest of the evening, Logan's thoughts remained in turmoil. His usual ability to compartmentalize, maintaining focus and control, was shattered. He found himself stealing glances at Sarah every chance he could. She avoided his gaze entirely, but he noticed the exhaustion in her movements, the quiet way she carried herself as if weighed down by something far heavier than the tray she balanced. Was it the pregnancy? Or something more profound? Something she wasn't willing to share? By the time dessert was served, Logan had barely touched his food. Amelia was engrossed in her phone and didn't notice his silence. But Logan's focus never left Sarah. When she disappeared into the kitchen, an unshakable urge took hold of him. He needed answers. Was the child his? Why hadn't she told him? Why was she working here, struggling, while he lived a life of luxury and privilege? "Excuse me," Logan said suddenly, pushing back his chair. Amelia looked up, startled. "Where are you going?" "Just a moment," he replied vaguely, already walking toward the kitchen. The maitre d' noticed him and hurried over. "Mr. Adams, is there a problem?" "No," Logan replied tersely. "Just taking care of something." He stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. The warm aroma of food and the clang of pans hit him as he rounded the corner, searching for her. He spotted Sarah near a side station, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked up in surprise as he approached, her face instantly guarded. "Sarah," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. Her expression hardened. "Logan, what are you doing back here?" "I saw you," he admitted, his voice measured but tense. "I couldn't just ignore it." Sarah straightened, crossing her arms over her apron, a movement that instinctively shielded her rounded belly. "You should have," she replied curtly. "You're pregnant," Logan said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Is it mine?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "What makes you think that?" "Because I know you," Logan replied, his tone softening. "And I know I haven't forgotten you as easily as I thought I would." Sarah stared at him, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and something he couldn't quite place. "You don't get to walk back into my life and demand answers, Logan. Not after how things ended. I just need to know the truth," he said, his voice steady. "Is it my child?" For a moment, Sarah said nothing. The air between them grew taut, the silence stretching. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping ever so slightly. "Yes," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on his. "The baby is yours." The words hit Logan like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice raw with disbelief. Sarah shook her head. "You made it clear back then, Logan. You didn't want children. You didn't want this life. I thought it was better for both of us if I moved on, alone." Logan ran a hand through his hair, grappling with the weight of her words. He had pushed her away, but now the reality of what he had lost, and might still lose, was unbearable. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice low. "I didn't know what I wanted then, but I do now." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Logan?" "I'm saying I want to be here, for you. For the baby. I don't know what that looks like, but I can't just walk away." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Actions speak louder than words, Logan. If you're serious, you'll have to prove it." "I will," Logan said firmly, determination settling into his features. "I promise." As Sarah turned back toward the kitchen, Logan remained rooted in place, his mind reeling. He had come looking for answers, but now he had a purpose, one he couldn't ignore. Logan Adams felt something stir deep within him for the first time in years, a desire to make things right. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. Logan Adams sat in the back seat of his car, the engine's hum barely registering as he stared blankly out the window. The neon glow of London's streets streamed past him, blurring into streaks of light that matched the chaos in his mind. Sarah's words relentlessly echoed his thoughts. "You made it clear back then, Logan. You didn't want this life." The confirmation that the child was his felt like a punch to the gut, one he hadn't anticipated. Logan had spent years building an empire. Wealth, power, respect. But at this moment, all of it felt hollow. The realization struck him hard. In his relentless pursuit of success, he had let the most crucial things slip through his fingers. The car pulled to his penthouse building, but Logan didn't move. "Sir?" his driver asked cautiously. Logan snapped out of his trance. "Take a drive," he muttered. "I need some time." The driver nodded silently, and the car glided back into traffic. Logan leaned his head back against the seat, his mind pulling him deeper into memories he had avoided for years. He remembered the quiet moments with Sarah, the evenings they spent curled up on the couch, her reading while he reviewed contracts. He had taken her presence for granted, assuming she would always be there, waiting patiently as he prioritized meetings, trips, and acquisitions. Then there were the fights. Sarah had been kind and gentle, but she wasn't weak. She had challenged him and pushed him to see beyond his ambition. "Logan, we can't keep living like this," she had said one evening, her voice trembling with frustration. "I'm tired of being invisible to you." His response had been cold, dismissive. "Sarah, I'm doing all of this for us. For our future." But she hadn't wanted that future. She had wanted a home filled with laughter, with children, with something more meaningful than the endless pursuit of success. Logan sighed, the weight of regret pressing down on him. He had been blind back then, so consumed by his own goals that he couldn't see how he was losing her. And now, Sarah was carrying his child, a life he had once rejected without realizing its value. The car slowed as they passed through a quiet neighborhood. Logan spotted a small park, its swings swaying gently in the breeze. "Stop here," he said abruptly. Stepping out, he inhaled the cool night air, trying to steady himself. He wandered to a bench and sat down, staring at the empty playground. He imagined Sarah here, years from now, pushing their child on the swings, laughter ringing out into the quiet evening. A hollow ache grew in his chest. This was his chance, not to fix the past but to change the future. But could he? Could a man who had spent his life chasing success learn how to be a father? Would Sarah even trust him enough to let him try? The questions swirled as he sat alone in the darkness. But deep within, amidst the regret and uncertainty, something shifted. For the first time in years, Logan felt a purpose that had nothing to do with profits or prestige. He didn't yet know how to earn Sarah's trust or prove himself worthy of his child, but one thing was clear. He wouldn't let this slip away again. The following morning, Logan arrived at his office earlier than usual, but the sleek, glass-walled space, once a symbol of his success, felt colder than ever. His assistant, Margaret, greeted him as he walked in. "Good morning, Mr. Adams. I've prepared the reports you requested." "Thank you, Margaret." "Cancel my morning meetings," he said, striding past her. Margaret blinked in surprise. Sir? The quarterly. Just reschedule them. He cut her off, softer this time. I have something more important to handle. Logan sat at his desk, his eyes lingering on the skyline view that had once given him pride. Now, it felt like a gilded cage. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and dialed the one person who could help him make sense of his turmoil. Richard Hayes, the private investigator. Richard, I need an update on Sarah Blake, Logan said, his tone firm but urgent. I need to know her schedule, where she lives, and if there's anything else I missed. Within hours, Logan held the updated report in his hands. It was a sobering read. Sarah lived in a modest flat, balancing long shifts at Maison Lumiere while preparing for the baby's arrival. There was no family to support her, no partner in her life. She had been facing this entirely on her own. Logan's heart tightened as he stared at a photo of her apartment building, a far cry from the life they had once shared. He had failed her then, and now she was struggling because of him. The guilt was suffocating, but it fueled his determination. Logan spent the next 2 days in unfamiliar territory: baby stores, parenting websites, and late-night research. He was a man of action, and while he couldn't erase the past, he could take steps to show Sarah that he had changed. Logan stood nervously outside Sarah's flat, a box of supplies in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. He had agonized over what to bring. A grand gesture would feel hollow, but showing up empty-handed seemed wrong. The flowers were simple and unassuming, and the box contained practical baby essentials: clothes, blankets, bottles, things he had spent hours carefully selecting. When Sarah opened the door, she froze, her brow furrowing in confusion. Logan? I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, Logan said quietly, but I'm here because I want to help. I brought some things for the baby. Sarah stared at him, her arms crossed protectively over her stomach. I don't need your charity, Logan. This isn't charity, he replied, his voice steady but sincere. This is me trying to be part of something I should never have walked away from. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me, but I want to earn that trust back. One step at a time. Sarah's gaze softened ever so slightly, though skepticism remained. She hesitated before finally stepping aside to let him in. The flat was small but warm, its walls decorated with soft touches of color and framed photos that spoke of resilience and hope. Logan set the box carefully on the table and turned to face Sarah, who watched him warily. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice low, almost vulnerable. But I want to learn. I want to be here, not just for the baby, but for you. Sarah looked away, her arms dropping to her sides. Logan, I've heard promises before. You were always good at saying the right things. I know, Logan replied, but this time, I'm not just saying it. I'm going to prove it. The silence that followed was heavy, but not entirely hostile. Sarah studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. We'll see, Logan. Actions speak louder than words. Logan nodded, accepting her challenge. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Sarah was no longer the woman who had waited patiently for him to come around. She was stronger now, independent, and fiercely protective of the life she was building. But Logan was no longer the man who walked away from her dreams. That night, as he left Sarah's flat, Logan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. For the first time, he could see a future that didn't revolve around boardrooms or business deals. It was a future built on love, responsibility, and redemption, and he was determined to earn it. The days following Logan's quiet visit to Sarah's flat marked a turning point. For a man who had always measured his worth in business acquisitions and power moves, Logan navigated a world where success wasn't measured by profits but by patience, trust, and humility. He immersed himself in learning about fatherhood, an unfamiliar yet strangely fulfilling territory. Parenting books piled up on his desk, filled with dog-eared pages and highlighted notes. Logan, the meticulous planner, approached this new role with the same diligence he once reserved for his most important business deals. Only this time, there was no negotiation, no shortcuts to results. But Logan quickly realized that earning Sarah's trust would be the most delicate challenge. She kept him at a distance, polite but guarded, her wariness clear in every glance. Her walls, built from years of disappointment, weren't easily breached. Each time he appeared at her door, carrying groceries, baby essentials, or simply an offer to help, Sarah accepted it but never with any invitation to stay. One late afternoon, Logan found Sarah sitting on a park bench near her flat, one hand resting protectively on her belly as she watched the children play in the fading light. Logan approached carefully, carrying a small bag from a nearby bakery. "I thought you might want something warm," he said, pulling out a box of freshly baked croissants and a cup of chamomile tea. Sarah glanced at the offering, her lips twitching slightly. "You don't give up, do you?" Logan shrugged, his voice soft. "Not when it matters." He sat beside her, leaving a comfortable space between them. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet was punctuated only by laughter from the playground and the occasional bark of a dog. Logan glanced at Sarah, noting how the evening light softened her features. She looked tired but resolute, a woman who had fought her battles alone and learned to survive. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Why now, Logan? Why are you trying so hard to be part of this?" Logan looked straight ahead, gathering his thoughts. "Because I was wrong. About everything." He exhaled slowly, his voice tinged with regret. "I thought success would make me happy. I thought focusing on my career was how I could build a better life. But I was so focused on the future that I missed what mattered in the present." Sarah didn't respond, but she didn't turn away either. Encouraged, Logan continued. "When I saw you again, pregnant, working so hard to make it on your own, it hit me how much I failed you. I let you down when you needed me most. And now," he paused, his voice steady but vulnerable, "now I see the chance to do better, to be better. For you and our child." Sarah's gaze softened, but her voice remained wary. "Words are easy, Logan. I've heard them before." "I know," he admitted. "But this isn't just words. It's me showing up. Every day, for as long as it takes." She studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in his resolve. "And what happens when it gets hard? When it's not convenient for you to show up anymore?" Logan met her eyes, his expression firm. "Then I'll keep showing up. Because this time, I won't let you down." Sarah looked away, her hand rubbing her belly as though drawing strength from the life growing inside her. "We'll see," she said quietly. But for the first time, Logan felt a shift, a tiny crack in the wall she had so carefully built. Logan was in his office 2 weeks later reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang. The screen flashed an unfamiliar number, and he considered ignoring it momentarily. But something told him to pick up. "Mr. Adams?" The voice on the other end was panicked and breathless. "It's Jenna, Sarah's neighbor. You need to come quickly." "Sarah? She's not well." Logan felt his heart drop. "What happened?" "She collapsed," Jenna said, the urgency in her tone cutting through him like a knife. "She's in a lot of pain. I don't think she called for an ambulance yet." Logan didn't need to hear more. "I'm on my way," he said, grabbing his coat and keys. The drive to Sarah's flat felt interminably long, even though Logan pushed the car faster than he ever had. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios, his chest tightening with fear. When he arrived, Winna was waiting at the door, her expression lined with worry. "She's inside," Jenna said, leading him up the stairs. "She didn't want me to call anyone, but I couldn't just stand by." Logan entered the small flat to find Sarah sitting pale and trembling on the edge of her couch. One hand clutched her stomach while the other gripped the cushion beside her. She looked up as he approached, surprise flickering across her face. "Logan, what are you doing here?" Her voice was weak but defiant. "You need help, Sarah," he said, crouching beside her. "We're going to the hospital. Now." "I'm fine," she murmured, though her grimace betrayed her. "You're not fine," Logan said firmly. "Please, don't fight me on this." Sarah hesitated, pride warring with reality, but another sharp wave of pain decided for her. She softly cried, and Logan didn't wait for her to argue further. Gently, he scooped her into his arms. "Logan, you don't have to." "I do have to," he cut her off, his tone leaving no room for debate. "You're not alone in this anymore." Logan carried Sarah to his car, his movements careful but urgent. As he drove toward the hospital, he glanced at her in the passenger seat. She was pale and silent, her breathing shallow. "It's too soon," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "The baby isn't ready." Logan reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but comforting. "It's going to be okay," he said, though his heart pounded violently. "I promise you, Sarah, you're not alone." The hospital staff acted quickly, whisking Sarah away while Logan paced the waiting room, his mind spinning. Time became meaningless as he sat there, helpless for the first time. This wasn't a problem he could solve with strategy or money. This was real, raw, and beyond his control. Hours later, a doctor approached him. Logan's heart stopped as he stood, bracing himself for the worst. "The baby arrived early," the doctor said calmly, "but he's stable. Sarah is resting, and both are doing well for now." Relief flooded Logan, leaving him unsteady on his feet. "Can I see them?" The doctor nodded, leading him into the quiet maternity ward. Logan's breath caught as he entered the room. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, pale but peaceful, her head resting on the pillow. In her arms was a tiny, swaddled bundle, fragile, yet perfect. Sarah looked up as Logan approached, her expression unreadable. "He's here," she whispered. Logan stood beside her, staring at his son for the first time. The baby's features were delicate, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Logan felt an unfamiliar ache swell in his chest. Love, raw and overwhelming. "Would you like to hold him?" Sarah asked quietly. Logan hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out. Sarah carefully placed the baby in his arms, and Logan looked down at the child. His child. Tears burned in his eyes, though he blinked them away. "Welcome to the world," Logan murmured, his voice unsteady. "I'm your dad." At that moment, Logan Adams, a man who had once believed success meant control and power, understood the truth. This tiny, fragile life was the most important thing he would ever hold, and he would do everything in his power not to let him down. The days following William's early arrival were a blur for Logan Adams. For the first time, he was immersed in something entirely out of his comfort zone. The sterile hospital room, the soft cries of the baby, and Sarah's quiet resilience were a stark contrast to the polished conference rooms and high-rise offices where he had spent most of his years. Each morning, Logan arrived at the hospital without fail. He brought fresh flowers for Sarah and coffee, not the fancy kind she used to drink at cafes during their marriage, but the simple, warm brew she appreciated now. Logan was learning to observe her anew. She wasn't the same woman he had once ignored. There was a new strength about her, tempered by motherhood and the burdens of raising a child alone. Although still wary of him, Sarah began to soften as the days passed. At first, her responses to him were brief, guarded. Yet each time Logan held William in his arms, she saw a flicker of change in the man who had once been so distant. As Logan sat beside her hospital bed, cradling Willia one afternoon, Sarah spoke softly. "You don't have to keep coming here every day. We'll be fine." Logan looked up from the tiny face nestled against his chest. "I want to be here, Sarah." He glanced at her, his voice quiet but firm. "I miss so much already. I'm not missing another moment." Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched him. This man she had once loved, who had let her down so ultimately. She could see the effort he was making now. The way his large, unfamiliar hands held William with an almost reverent gentleness, the way he listened without interrupting. And for the first time, Sarah wondered if Logan Adams really could change. Actions speak louder than words. That had been her refrain. Yet here he was, showing up every day, without fail. "Do you want to feed him?" Sarah asked after a long silence, her voice tentative. Logan blinked, surprised by the offer. "Me?" She gave him a small smile, handing him a bottle. "He needs to eat every 2 hours. You might as well learn." Taking the bottle, Logan shifted nervously, adjusting William in his arms. He had closed million-dollar deals and navigated ruthless boardroom battles, but nothing compared to the weight of this moment. Sarah gave him quiet instructions, and Logan followed carefully. When William latched onto the bottle, his tiny fingers curling around Logan's thumb, something inside him shifted again. You're a natural, Sarah murmured, her tone soft and unreadable. Logan looked up at her, his gaze sincere. I'm trying, Sarah. For him. And us, whatever that might look like. Sarah didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't look away either. A week later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. Logan initially insisted on driving her and William home, though Sarah hesitated. She had spent so long managing independently that accepting help, even from the baby's father, felt foreign. I can take a cab, Logan. You've done enough, she argued gently, holding William in her arms as they stood outside the hospital doors. You don't need to do this alone, Logan said, his voice steady but kind. Please, Sarah, let me help. Finally, she relented. The drive to Sarah's flat was quiet, except for William's occasional soft sound in the back seat. Logan glanced at the rearview mirror, his heart swelling as he watched the baby sleep peacefully in his carrier. When they arrived at Sarah's tiny flat, Logan carried the bags while Sarah held William close to her chest. Stepping inside, Logan looked around the modest space, clean, tidy, and lovingly prepared for the baby. A small crib sat near the couch, and shelves lined with carefully folded baby clothes showed how much Sarah had managed independently. Logan set the bags down and turned to face her. I meant what I said, Sarah. I want to help. Financially, practically, whatever you need. Sarah sighed, shifting William to her other shoulder. Logan, it's not about the money. You think you can just throw cash at this and improve everything, but that's not how it works. I know, Logan said softly. This isn't about money for me. I want to be here for him. For you. Sarah looked at him, her face etched with exhaustion and hesitation. Why now? Why not years ago when I needed you? Logan swallowed hard, guilt weighing heavy on his shoulders. Because back then, I was too selfish to see what mattered. I was so obsessed with success that I thought love, family, was a distraction. I pushed you away because I was scared. Scared of failing, scared of not being enough. But I see now how wrong I was. And I'm here to prove it, Sarah. Sarah studied him for a long time, her gaze sharp and searching. Prove it how, Logan? By showing up with gifts and promises? That's easy. But what happens when the novelty wears off? Logan shook his head. This isn't a novelty for me. I know it'll take time, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm not giving up. I'm here to stay. Sarah didn't respond, but there was something in her eyes, something softer than before. She turned away, placing William gently in his crib. Logan watched her, struck by the quiet strength that had carried her through these months alone. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter this time. I don't know if I can trust you, Logan, but I won't stop you from trying, for William's sake. Logan nodded, her words landing like both a challenge and a lifeline. That's all I asked. Logan's actions began to speak louder than his promises. He visited Sarah's flat regularly, but not as an intruder. He brought groceries, learned to soothe William when he cried, and even changed diapers, a task he had once thought beneath him but now accepted without complaint. One evening, Sarah found Logan sitting on the floor next to William's crib, softly humming as the baby drifted off to sleep. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the man she had once loved, a man she thought incapable of change, gently caring for their son. Where did you learn that song? She asked quietly. Logan looked up, startled. My mother sang it to me when I couldn't sleep. I guess I remembered. Sarah smiled faintly, stepping into the room. You never told me much about her. Logan hesitated before responding. I didn't want to think about her back then. She left when I was young. I guess part of me thought if I focused on success, I wouldn't feel like I'd lost anything. He glanced at William, his voice softening. But looking at him now, I don't want him to feel like I did. I don't want him to grow up without me. Sarah sank into the chair beside him, folding her arms across her chest. For the first time, she saw not the polished, untouchable businessman but the boy he had once been. The boy who had grown up chasing success to hide from his wounds. You've changed, Sarah said softly, surprising herself. Logan looked at her, his eyes sincere. I'm trying, and I'll keep trying until you believe me. Sarah didn't answer, but as Logan turned back to watch William sleep, she felt something shift inside her. a tiny spark of hope she hadn't allowed herself to think in years. The days turned weeks, and Logan Adams stepped into roles he never imagined. He was no longer the distant businessman hiding behind boardrooms and conference calls. He was learning to be present, imperfect but persistent. Every morning, Logan stopped by Sarah's flat. At first, his visits were brief and tentative, bringing essentials like diapers, formula, or fresh meals from the local market. Over time, they became a quiet routine. He would knock softly, Sarah would answer with her usual guarded expression, and William would greet him with the innocent, curious gaze only a child could give. One morning, Logan arrived earlier than usual, balancing a tray of coffee and fresh pastries. Sarah opened the door in her worn sweatshirt, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "I brought breakfast," Logan said, offering her a sheepish smile. "Figured you could use a break from cereal." Sarah stepped aside, wordlessly letting him in. "You're early," she muttered, but there was no sharpness in her tone, only exhaustion. "You look like you haven't slept," Logan said, concern in his voice. "I haven't," Sarah admitted, moving to pick up a fussy William from his crib. "He's been up all night, teething, and nothing I do seems to help." Logan hesitated, watching her rock their son, the weight of parenthood taking its toll. "Let me try," he offered softly, stepping closer. Sarah blinked, surprised. "Logan, you?" "Let me," he repeated gently. "You need to rest, Sarah." Reluctantly, she passed William to Logan, watching him cradle the baby with growing confidence. Logan began pacing the small living room, whispering soft reassurances to his son while bouncing him gently. Sarah sat on the couch, her head resting against the armrest, too tired to argue. As the minutes passed, Sarah closed her eyes, lulled by the steady rhythm of Logan's footsteps and William's muffled whimpers. She felt herself drifting into sleep for the first time in days, the weight of her exhaustion finally lifting. Logan continued pacing, his focus entirely on William. The baby's cries began to soften, his little hand curling against Logan's chest as he settled. Logan stared down at him, a mixture of awe and fear stirring inside him. The tiny life in his arms wasn't just a responsibility. He was a part of Logan, a reflection of everything he could be if he didn't fail. Looking over at Sarah, now fast asleep, Logan felt a new wave of determination. Sarah had been carrying this burden alone for far too long. If he wanted to be a father, a partner, or anything to her, he needed to do more than just show up. He needed to stay. As Sarah began to let her guard down, the quiet moments between her and Logan became less strained. One evening, after a long day, Logan arrived at Sarah's flat with dinner. He had begun cooking himself, learning simple recipes, and tonight's spaghetti meal. "It's probably not restaurant quality," Logan admitted as he set the plates down, "but it's edible, I think." Sarah smirked, a rare smile teasing her lips. "If it's terrible, I'll let you know." They sat at the small kitchen table, the air between them more manageable than before. Sarah glanced at Logan, watching as he twirled spaghetti around his fork. Something about seeing the polished businessman doing something so ordinary made her soften even more. "Why are you trying so hard?" Sarah asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Logan paused, setting his fork down. "Because I don't want to be the man I used to be," he said simply. "I look at you, at William, and I see the life I could have had, the life I should have fought for years ago." Sarah's gaze lingered on him, skeptical but curious. "People don't just change overnight, Logan." "I know," he replied, "and I don't expect you to believe me yet. I can't undo the past, Sarah, but I can try to make the future better. For you. For him." Sarah looked away, her fingers toying with the edge of her napkin. "It's not just about William. I felt like I wasn't enough for you, just in your way. You weren't there, Logan. I was alone even when we were together." Logan's throat tightened at her words, the raw pain in her voice cutting through him like a blade. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry, Sarah. I was so blinded by what I thought success looked like that I couldn't see how much I was losing. You were never in my way. You kept me grounded. I just didn't see it until it was too late." Sarah's eyes softened, though her walls remained intact. "What makes you think you won't return to who you were?" Logan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. Because I've already lost you once. I know what that feels like, and I won't let it happen again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet in the room was heavy with unspoken emotions, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Logan had learned that healing didn't happen in grand gestures, but in these small, honest moments. Finally, Sarah sighed. We'll see, Logan. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The weeks that followed, Logan began showing up for William in ways Sarah never expected. He was there for doctor's appointments, learning to ask the right questions. He researched child development, often arriving at her door with new books or tiny clothes he thought William might need. He was careful, though, never overstepping the boundaries Sarah had set. One evening, as Logan fed William in the nursery, Sarah watched quietly from the doorway. The sight of Logan, this once emotionally distant man, holding their son with such tenderness stirred something she couldn't ignore. You're getting better at that, Sarah said softly. Logan glanced up, a small smile tugging at his lips. He's a good teacher. Sarah folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe. You've surprised me, Logan. I didn't think you'd stick around this long. Logan's smile faded into something more serious. I'm not leaving, Sarah. Not this time. Sarah nodded, her heart conflicted. She wanted to believe him, but years of disappointment had left scars not easily erased. Yet, as she honestly looked at Logan, she saw glimpses of the man she once loved. Not the businessman obsessed with success, but the man who could be kind, patient, and fiercely protective of those who mattered to him. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. Not as the people they once were, but as the people they were becoming. Time, though still fragile, began to weave a tentative thread of understanding between Logan and Sarah. William grew stronger each week, his laughter filling Sarah's small, flat-like sunlight piercing an overcast sky. Those moments became sacred for Logan, proof that he was part of something far more significant than himself. But trust, Sarah knew, was not built on words or fleeting gestures. It required consistency, proof that Logan would not retreat when life became difficult. The opportunity to test Logan's resolve came one particularly chaotic afternoon. Sarah stood in the kitchen, balancing William on one hip while stirring a pot of soup on the stove. The baby fussed, his cries growing louder, and Sarah, sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, felt her composure fraying. A knock at the door startled her. "Just a minute," she called, struggling to soothe William. She opened the door to find Logan holding a small box of supplies and a bouquet of daisies. "Hey, I thought I'd—" Logan stopped mid-sentence, taking in the scene before him. Sarah's exhausted expression, the smell of something burning, and William squirming unhappily in her arms. "What's burning?" Logan asked, his tone calm but alert. Sarah groaned, rushing back to the stove. "The soup. Perfect." Without another word, Logan stepped inside. He set down the supplies, rolled his sleeves, and took William from Sarah's arms. The baby fussed briefly before quieting, distracted by Logan's steady movements. Sarah paused, watching Logan bounce William gently, murmuring soft reassurances as though he'd been doing it for years. "You don't have to fix everything, Logan," she said, her voice weary. "I'm not here to fix anything," Logan replied softly. "I'm here to help," Sarah sighed, stirring the pot with less urgency now that the immediate crisis had passed. "I'm just not used to this, having someone step in." "I know," Logan said, "but you don't have to do this alone anymore, Sarah." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah turned to face him, seeing not the high-powered businessman she once resented, but a slowly, quiet man learning to improve. For her, for their son. After dinner, Logan offered to stay and help clean up. As he wiped the counters, Sarah sat at the table, cradling a now-sleeping William. She watched Logan work with a quiet focus, moving around the small kitchen as if he belonged there. Finally, she spoke. "You know, Logan, I spent so long resenting you for not being there when I needed you most." Logan stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. "I deserve that," he said simply. Sarah hesitated before continuing. "But seeing you now, Part of me wonders if I've been holding on to that anger because it was easier than hoping you might change. Logan's gaze softened. I don't blame you, Sarah. I gave you every reason to believe I couldn't change. He paused, his voice quiet but steady. But I have changed, and I'm not going anywhere this time. For the first time in years, Sarah felt something she had long buried, hope. Months passed, and the cold days of winter gave way to the gentle warmth of spring. Life had settled into a rhythm that neither Sarah nor Logan could have imagined a year ago. Logan's presence in their lives was no longer tentative or uncertain. He had proven, day by day, that he was here to stay. On a bright Sunday afternoon, Sarah sat on a park bench watching William, now a few months old, nestled in Logan's arms. The two sat beneath a large oak tree, Logan holding William up to the sunlight as the baby squealed in delight, his tiny hands reaching for the swaying leaves. Sarah couldn't help but smile. The sight of Logan, once the epitome of cold detachment, now doting on their son with unguarded affection, was almost surreal. Yet it was real. Logan had kept his promises, showing up for her and William in ways she never thought possible. Logan noticed her watching and smiled back, rising to join her on the bench. He sat down carefully, cradling William as though he were the most precious thing in the world. He loves the park, Logan said softly, glancing at the baby's wide, curious eyes. Sarah nodded. It's his favorite place. They sat silently for a moment, the breeze carrying the laughter of other families nearby. Logan shifted slightly, his expression turning serious. Sarah, I need to ask you something. Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowing. What is it? Logan took a deep breath, his voice steady but uncharacteristically vulnerable. I want us to try again. Not just for William, but for us, for the family we could be. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. Logan, I know I can't undo the past, Logan continued, his gaze holding hers, but I want to build a future with you. I want us to be more than co-parents. I want to prove that I can be the man you deserve, the father William needs. Sarah looked away, her heart racing. She wanted to believe him. She tried to let go of the fear and mistrust that had held her back for so long. But it wasn't easy. I'm scared, she admitted finally, her voice soft. What if you change your mind? What if you go back to the man you used to be? Logan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I won't, he said firmly, because I know what it feels like to lose you, to lose everything that matters. I'm not the same man, Sarah, and I never will be again. Sarah searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. The man sitting beside her, the father holding their son, wasn't the man she had walked away from all those years ago. Finally, she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Okay, Logan, but this time we take it slow. Logan smiled, his own eyes shining with emotion. As slow as you need. He glanced down at William, who had fallen asleep in his arms, entirely at peace. This is our second chance, he whispered as if speaking to Sarah and their son. And I'm not going to waste it. A year later, Logan stood in the backyard of their modest new home, grilling burgers as Sarah set the table on the porch. William, now a toddling little boy, played in the grass with a wooden toy airplane, his laughter echoing through the yard. Logan glanced over at Sarah, catching her eye as she smiled. They had rebuilt their life one day at a time, learning to trust, forgive, and love each other again. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was real. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Sarah joined him by the grill, slipping her hand into his. I never thought we'd get here, she admitted softly. Logan looked at her, his expression warm. Neither did I, but I'm glad we did. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Sarah smiled up at him. You earned it, Logan. Together, they watched William run through the grass, his tiny legs carrying him forward, full of laughter and life. Logan tightened his grip on Sarah's hand, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. For the first time, he felt whole. In that backyard, under the fading light of day, Logan Adams understood what true success looked like. It wasn't in wealth, power, or control. It was in moments like this. The child's laughter, the warmth of a home, and the love of a family he had fought to earn. And he knew, without a doubt, that he would never let it go.